right, Isaiah chapter 49, starting at verse 8. Isaiah chapter 49, starting at verse 8. Thus says the Lord, in a time of favor I have answered you. In a day of salvation I have helped you. I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people, to establish the land, to apportion the desolate heritages. Saying to the prisoners, come out, to those who are in darkness, appear. They shall feed along the way. On all bare heights shall be the pasture. They shall not hunger or thirst, neither scorching wind nor sun shall strike them. For he who has pity on them will lead them, and by springs of water will guide them. And I will make all my mountains a road, and my highways shall be raised up. Behold, these shall come from afar, and behold, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Syene. Sing for joy, O heavens, and exult, O earth. Break forth, O mountains, into singing, for the Lord has comforted his people and will have compassion on his afflicted. But Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, my Lord has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. Your builders make haste. Your destroyers and those who laid you waste go out from you. Lift up your eyes around and see. They all gather. They come to you. As I live, declares the Lord, you shall put them all on as an ornament. You shall bind them on as a bride does. Surely your waste and your desolate places and your devastated land, surely now you will be too narrow for your inhabitants, and those who swallowed you up will be far away. The children of your bereavement will yet say in your ears, the place is too narrow for me. Make room for me to dwell in. Then you will say in your heart, who has borne me these? I was bereaved and barren, exiled and put away. But who has brought up these? Behold, I was left alone. From where have these come? Thus says the Lord God, behold, I will lift up my hand to the nations, and raise my signal to the peoples. And they shall bring your sons in their arms, and your daughters shall be carried on their shoulders. Kings shall be your foster fathers, and their queens your nursing mothers. With their faces to the ground they shall bow down to you, and lick the dust of your feet. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who wait for me shall not be put to shame. Can the prey be taken from the mighty, or the captives of a tyrant be rescued? For thus says the Lord, even the captives of the mighty shall be taken, and the prey of the tyrant be rescued. For I will contend with those who contend with you, and I will save your children. I will make your oppressors eat their own flesh, and they shall be drunk with their own blood as with wine. Then all flesh shall know that I am the Lord your Savior, and your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. That was the inspired and inerrant word of God. Grace and peace to the body. I want to thank everybody who is tuning in tonight, and those who don't tune in but listen to it later. I appreciate that. I appreciate your time very much. Real quick, let me answer this. Will it be just you and Chris discussing it? Just going to be me reviewing, going over Daniel chapter 8. I'm going to be addressing every argument that I can think of that the SDA has, and I'm going to be responding to it. So I'm going to try to represent the SDA position as well as I can and as properly as I can, as if I was an SDA, and then I will address that and give my arguments in preparation for what I'm doing Friday. So for those who don't know, Chris Lucas has a SDA pastor coming on Friday, and I will be participating in that discussion. And I believe this will be his last video on Adventism for a while, because I know he wants to move on to other topics. And so this will be a good opportunity to discuss with somebody who is, I mean, I've never talked to him, never really listened to his videos, but I assume he is very learned, knows his position very well, and is well-mannered and can have a good dialogue. So I hope it'll be edifying for those who are going to be listening. So this will just be prep for Friday night, giving some arguments against the SDA position. Which pastor is it? Do you know? Well, actually, I think he's a pastor. Um, it's the YouTube channel uh, Angels in the Glen. I think he's a pastor, but I could have misspoken on that. He might just be a theologian, scholar of the SDA Church, or just a YouTuber. I don't know much about him. So, with that being said, and I know I've gone over Daniel 8, so I don't really expect many people to listen to this. But this will be recorded for those in the future who uh, do want to go over this topic. Like if I meet somebody online, I can just point them to this video. Um, and at the end of this discussion, I will post the link to come in and chat about Daniel 8, Daniel 9, or the book of Daniel in general. If anybody is interested, uh, I'll leave it open for a little while. And then if nobody wants to join, I will just end it. All right, with that being said, let's go over the book of Daniel, chapter 8. So, the reason why this chapter is so important when you're talking with Adventists is because this chapter here is really the chapter that can be used to support the date of 1844. And why that is important is because what the SDA believes is that on 1844, uh, Christ moved from the holy place in the heavenly sanctuary to the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary. So during his time in the heavenly sanctuary, he was doing intercession, stuff like that. Now he moves from 1844 on, he's in the most holy place. And now he's going over the records of professed believers, starting with Adam, all the way up till the last person. And then he leaves, he steps out of the most holy place. And there's a short period of time where when he steps out, um, you are left without a mediator and you have to um, go through the seven last plagues. And then after the seven last plagues happen, he returns and does his thing. So we'll be focusing, and so that's why we are focusing on this, and also because I believe Angel. Okay, so he is a pastor. What's up, Chris? Good to see you. Yeah, okay, so he is a pastor, Stefan. All right. So yeah, that's he'll be on Chris Lucas's channel, and if anybody listens to my channel that does not listen to Chris or follow Chris, definitely follow Chris' channel. I'll try to figure out. Let me get his channel up here, and I'll post it in the comments. I should be doing this more. I'm just not that good at it. Definitely check out his channel. We don't agree on everything, but we don't have to be brothers in the Lord. I believe that is brother Chris's channel. Definitely check it out. Good content. All right, let's do this. So the SDA will say that Daniel chapter 8 is connected with the other visions in the book of Daniel. Especially they'll focus in on chapters 11 and 12 because that helps them establish their position with 1844. Um, so when that pops up, if I remember, I'll point that out. There are some things that I do want to point out because I do believe they are connected, but just not in the way that they point out. So let's start here in verse 1 of Daniel 8. It says, in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. Oh, I should mention real quick too, is that the visions given to Daniel are not placed in chronological order. So I believe actually the vision of 7, 8 are given before chapter 5 happens, I believe. But it's pretty interesting if you go through the chronology of the visions or of the book of Daniel in general. It's not just from chapter 1 to chapter 12 is when it happened. It jumps around a little bit. It's pretty interesting. I forget the exact order it's in. But anyways, the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me. So that's going to be important to notice or to pay attention to is the word vision, because the SDA will point out that, in fact, there are two words in the Hebrew that are translated as vision, and that can confuse you, and you can kind of gloss over the importance of that, is what they would say. And the importance being that it connects it with Daniel chapter 9, especially. And we'll go over that when we get to that point. But there's two words. One is chazon or chazon right here. And the other we will see later is mare. And I'll show you how they connect that, and I'll show you why I believe it is wrong, and why it's only really done. And I say this as an argument against them. It is only really connected to prove 1844. There is really no other reason to connect Daniel chapter 8 and chapter 9 in this way, due to the words vision. Because if you were actually to connect these two visions, um, you'd have to have the 2300 happening within the 490 years. Not, and they have it the other way around. They have the 490 years happening within the 2300 years. So the 2300, from my position, are not years, but would be days, or rather half days. So it's actually, the vision is only lasts for 1150 days. So with that, we'll definitely get in that more. So in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, this Kazon, so that word is Kazon, appeared to Daniel. Now notice here, appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. Now he does this in a number of chapters. He says, I'm receiving this vision after that previous vision. That's basically what he's saying. And in here he's saying, a vision, or a Kazon, appeared to me, Daniel, after that vision I received in chapter 7. That's what he's saying right there. Verse 2, and I saw in the Kazon, so I'll go to the King James Version here to show you this is still Kazon, okay? So I saw in the Kazon, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the Kazon, that's still the Kazon. I'll just prove it to you so you don't think I'm misrepresenting Kazon, okay? And I saw in the Kazon, and I was at the Ulai Canal. And so this location, regardless of what you believe all this means right here, is important. And I'll point this out when it comes time. But his location is two places: Susa, the citadel, and the Ulai Canal. Okay, verse 3. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal, that is the Ulai Canal. It had two horns. So that's how we know the Ulai Canal is happening within the vision, because the ram is standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So let's stop here. The ram, I would say, represents Media Persia, and the SDAs would agree with me. So something that you need to, in my opinion, you make note of with the book of Daniel and with the visions, whether if it's chapter 2, chapter 7, 8, 9, and 10 through 12, all of them follow what I would call a 5-kingdom scheme or setup. The 5-kingdom scheme is this. The first kingdom is Babylonia. The second one is Media Persia. So right here in verse 3, the ram. The third kingdom is Greece, and we'll see that here in a minute. The fourth kingdom is Rome, and the fifth kingdom is Messiah's kingdom, or the Messianic kingdom. Okay, so that's the 5-kingdom scheme or setup, and every vision follows that setup. But some visions, like here in Daniel 8, will start with, as we just see right here, the second beast and not the first beast. But if you go to chapter 7, for example, the first vision starts with Babylonia, okay, right here, lion and eagle's wings, okay. That's the Babylonian Empire. That's what I'm referring to when I'm referring to the 5-kingdom scheme. Stephanie, grace and peace to you, and Kevin, same to you, brothers. Good to see both of you. I'm going to open up the chat at the end of this. I'm just going to be going over some arguments and prep for Friday's discussion with a SDA pastor on Brother Chris's channel. So definitely check that out when it pops up. It should be a good conversation. And hopefully, we will convert an SDA pastor out of Seventh day Adventism. If not, at the very least, he will be exposed to the truth and will make his decisions. Chris Lucas is doing the show, and he has an SD pastor on, and I'll be participating on it. And I think after this video on Friday, he's gonna be moving on to other topics as well too. So look out for those. I'm sure they'll be good. He always has good guests, and I remember there was a guest Chris had. I can't remember his name, but he was really good. I enjoyed it a lot. So Chris has good shows. I enjoy him. All right. Verse 4. So we agree, both the SDAs and myself agree that the ram is Medo Persia. All right. Verse 4. And so I do need to mention, they will say, when we get to this, but they will say that the 2,300 years starts here with the ram. So it starts with Medo Persia, but they will say that there's no starting point for the 2,300 given in chapter 8. And that is why we need to go to chapter 9, because chapter 9 also, the decree starts in with Medo Persia, and it has a starting point, a date. That is another argument they use to link these two. Verse 4, I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. We all agree what that is, conquering and growing as the kingdom of Medo Persia. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. Now, what I would say real quick, I also need to note, is that I believe that this vision is starting with the ram simply to give a context and to make it very, very, very clear that the main focus of this vision is not starting with Medo Persia, but it's Greece, the Greek Empire. That is the main focus of this. But it's just to give the context to show that, hey, here's Medo Persia, and guess what? Next is Greece. And you'll see all this activity with the Greek kingdom. All right. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Verse 5. As I was considering, so he was contemplating the Medo Persia kingdom. I'm sure he probably had a good idea, because it was coming up. Not too far in the distance. I believe this vision was given in 557, 530, no, 555 or something like that, BC. I forget the exact date. Anyways, behold, a male goat came from the west. So this is the Greek Empire, and both sides, mine and the SDA, would agree this is the Greek Empire. Okay. Came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. So I would say this came from the west across the whole face of the earth without touching the ground. That refers to his speedy conquest, and the amount of conquest he had was absolutely incredible. And I say he because his conspicuous horn, both sides would also agree, is Alexander the Great. He came to the ram, that is the Greek Empire, came to the ram, who is the Medo Persian Empire, with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal. And he ran at him in his powerful wrath. So in other words, he went to go conquer the kingdom of Medo Persia. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. So basically, from this point, from verse 1 to verse 7, both the SDAs and myself are more or less in agreement on what's being described here. Let me check some comments real quick. Thank you. I appreciate it. The term is Medo Persia. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Thank you. That was my mistake. Brandon, grace and peace to you. Good to see you. I'm sure you're aware, but this is just prep for Friday night's discussion on Chris's show. And as I said before, hopefully we can wake this SDA pastor up, as I've seen happen at least somewhat in my personal life here in my town, because I talk to the SD pastors here whenever a new one comes. Hopefully, this I believe his name was John of Angels of the Glen will eventually be convicted of the truth and leave the SDA church. That is my hope and my prayer for this Friday conversation. All right. Verse 8. Then the goat, that is Greece, became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So the broken horn would be Alexander the Great's death. And instead of it, there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. Okay, so the here's where it's going to start. We're going to start seeing some differences. Maybe verse 9 more so, but so Alexander the Great dies, and we all know the history. After a little while, his kingdom splits up into four kingdoms. And that's what these four conspicuous horns refer to. And these four horns are spread out to the four winds, that is, north, south, east, and west. Okay, that's going to be important. Verse 9, and so the SDAs would also agree with this. So verse 9 really is where the disagreement starts. Out of one of them came a little horn. Now, we need to stop, because what they will say is out of one of them, uh, due to the Hebrew grammar, cannot refer to the four horns, but rather it refers to the four winds of heaven. And the reason why they say this is so they can say it comes from the west. That is, was it Lysimachus? Or John will probably correct me. I can't remember which general it was that would be over towards the west. But anyways, this horn will come out, they would say, not come out, but it would basically grow into the Roman Empire is what they say. So they say this little horn here is the same little horn in chapter 7. It's just this horn refers to the pagan Roman Empire, whereas the little horn in chapter 7 refers to the papal Roman Empire. So a couple of things we need to notice is that to say that the little horn comes out of the four winds and not the four horns is to make a distinction without a difference. It doesn't matter if you say four horns or four winds, because notice the four horns are toward the four winds. So in other words, the four horns grow in the four winds. So this distinction is utterly irrelevant. And you'll notice with the SDA position is that they make a big deal about really nothing. Whether it's the four horns or four winds, whether it's the mare and kazon argument, they are really making this huge fuss over nothing, because, again, as I will say, it is ultimately to prove 1844 investigative judgment. So they have to make all these little kind of like peripheral arguments, these side arguments, to try to bolster and prove 1844. Now, to prove that I will prove not only from this text in verse 8 that it's a distinction without a difference, but if we go over chapter 11, remember I said these visions are connected, and I do believe they are connected. So I believe in chapter 11 here, the Greece Empire is spoken of here, starting in verse 3 of chapter 11. But you notice here in verse 4, so it's talking about the Greek Empire. Well, I'll start in verse 3. Yeah, so verse 3 starts talking about the Greek Empire. Then a mighty king shall arise. That is talking about the Greece Empire here. So that would be Alexander the Great, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken. Notice that. That's referring to the same thing in chapter 8, where the conspicuous horn, or that big horn on the goat, is broken. Same event, same thing. And divided. So that's the four horns right there in verse 8. Notice this empire is divided toward the four winds of heaven. So these four horns in chapter 8 are north are divided and grow in the north, south, east, and west. Again, proving my point that it does not matter if I don't mind granting the SDA the position that it grows up from the little horn comes out from one of the four winds. Doesn't matter because that's just telling me that it rises up from one of the horns. It's the same thing. All right. All right. I almost said chapter 9. Daniel 8, verse 9. I'll reread it. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. Now, they'll say this means that he's coming out from the west, but it does not mention the north either. So it's possible he could be growing out from the north. But whether it's the west or the north, it's not really that relevant because we're in the Greek Empire. We're not in the fourth beast or the Roman Empire. Another thing we need to point out to this SDA, Pastor John, is the beast systems, whether it's the first, second, third, or fourth, are never referred to as little horns. Rather, uh, the little horns always come out of the beast. So, in other words, this little horn here is not the fourth beast. It's coming out of one of the beasts, and this one being the third beast. That's very important to point out. And we'll see here as well too when we drop down here to the explanation of it. We'll see that. Um, well, I'll go through that in a minute. Actually, I'll go through right now. I'll kind of hop back and forth. So we'll start here in verse 20. And verse 20 is where it starts the explanation of the vision that was given from verses 3 to 14. And it says here in verse 20, as for the ram that you saw with two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, or Medo Persia. Okay. Consistent with the vision or the chazon that's given. Verse 21, and the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. So that'd be kingdom. I'm not sure why they put king. I wonder if the KJV put kingdom. No, I wonder why they put a king there. Interesting. Verse 22, as for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, that is, four kingdoms shall arise from his nation. So it's pretty clear these four horns are the four nations that grow up in the four winds. Okay. But not with his power. Verse 23, and at the latter end of their kingdoms, so notice at the latter end of these four kingdoms, now we need to make note of this, and I'll be bringing this up. I think this is a very strong point against their position. At the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit. So I will be asking them, who are these transgressors? Because I think it is pretty clear, and we'll go back up and look, and we'll see that in the chazon or the vision. These transgressors are the Jews. And you read about this in First Maccabees, where a number of the Jews were not only siding with Antiochus, but like allying themselves with him and creating all these pagan gyms and doing all these wicked things with the Jews to side with Antiochus. So I believe that's referring to here. But notice here, though, that only at the latter end of their kingdom, when these transgressors have reached their limit, that is when a king of boldface, and I would say this king of boldface is that little horn in verse 9, okay? Only after these two previous things that are mentioned happen, then the king of boldface, one who understands riddles, arises. Okay, that's very important as well too. I'll be bringing that up. Because let's think about this. So they have the king of boldface, and notice it's a king. I guess you could say it's also a kingdom, but it is a king of boldface, one who understands riddles. So it's not the kingdom of Rome, it's rather a king of. And if they were holding that this is referring to the fourth beast, it is a king of the Roman Empire. They would need to tell us who that is, and not just say it is the fourth beast, but rather a specific king needs to be mentioned because he is one who understands riddles, and he arises after these transgressors. Okay, but it's still in the latter end of the division of the Greek kingdom. Okay, it's still at that latter end, so it's still happening in the third beast is when this king of boldface arises. So I think that's very will be very challenging for him to get around, I think. And if you guys tune in and listen to John, do pay attention to his words and see if he sidesteps the arguments that Chris and I will be presenting, or does he address them head on? And you'll see that there are certain arguments that he just can't address head on, my personal opinion. All right, let's hop back up to verse 10. So it grew great, that is the little horn, even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. Now, I would say this is referring to, and I believe in the explanation it talks about the Jewish people, because remember, there are um, two divisions at this time of the Jewish people. There are those who are the transgressors who have reached their limit. Then there are the saints, the faithful. Okay, so you'll see that back and forth. So here is referring to the faithful Jews who are being trampled on. And I mean, if you want to, I mean, so there is this theme in the book of Daniel, right? That has behind the physical human wars and conflicts has the spiritual conflicts and wars. Okay, so that's important to note. So it is possible that um, hosts of heaven or uh, stars could be referring to the angelic hosts that are like in chapter 10 mentions, I believe it mentions Michael and Gabriel and that are waging war against and fighting against the king of um, Medo-Persia and Greece. So it could be referring that here, but the explanation does not tell us that. What it does tell us, though, is that at the very least, one, if not both of these, the stars and the host of heaven, are the Jews. And that is also something I will bring up here. So it became great. Oh, something I forgot to mention, I believe. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So the SDAs will point out that here in verse 9, that this little horn grows exceedingly great. And the argument they present is that Alexander the Great did not grow exceedingly great, but rather the Roman Empire grows exceedingly great. And that is a fact of history, is what they say. Well, again, we need to read all of this in context, right? What does it say? It says it grows exceedingly great toward the south, the east, and the glorious land. And we know that Antiochus the Great did all of that. And also, I would argue that it grows exceedingly great towards the host of heaven and the stars. Because remember what Alexander the Great does to the Jewish people. He slaughters them. He forbids them to keep Sabbath, which is interesting. I'm going to ask him about this, if I remember, is that the SDAs have what's called a end times Sabbath law, Sunday Sabbath law that'll come into effect, they believe. And when the Sunday Sabbath law comes into effect, those who observe it will receive the mark of the beast, and those who keep the biblical seventh day Sabbath will receive the seal of God. Okay, so Antiochus the Great, I don't see why they don't see him as a shadow fulfillment or a type of that, because that would be some proof right there, right? because what does Antiochus do? Antiochus forbids the Jews to keep Sabbath and the feast days. Like he made laws forbidding them to do that. That seems to be a good type and anti-type, but of course they can't do that, because if they do, then they have to give up their 2300 1844 investigative judgment. So they're kind of stuck there. But it is, I'll be kind of curious what he thinks about that. Not only did Antiochus do that, but he also desecrates the temple, takes away the daily, and all that kind of stuff. So really, and I'll share a link to a paper that goes through the history of Antiochus, and lays all this out for you to see, all the information there. I'm gonna read some comments real quick. Uh, Jamie, good to see you. Do you suppose Daniel 7 reached farther than Daniel 8? Yes, Daniel 7 does for sure. No doubt. Daniel 7 probably would be the one that would support reaching all the way to the second coming of Christ, possibly. Uh, who would SDA say the transgressors are? You know what? Off the top of my head, I don't recall. It might be Rome. Let me see if I got, but I don't want to say that as a fact because I don't actually recall off the top of my head. Um, because if the transgressors are the Jews, then they're really stuck in a pickle, right? Because it would kind of keep it, either they would have two choices, and the commentary kind of their commentary notices this, and mentions that at least in part it was fulfilled in the first century AD. So you really have two choices with Daniel chapter 8. It is either fulfilled in the time of Antiochus, or it was filled in the time of the first century Jews. Those are your two options there. Those are the two times that the sanctuary was desecrated and trampled on, and the host was given over and all that. But here's the issue: is that the 2300, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I'm kind of curious about this transgressors. What verse was it? 23. Okay, so here in their commentary, let me read. It says the Greek version, and I'm quoting from their commentary on Daniel chapter 8, verse 23. It says the transgressors. The Greek versions read sins, a translation that may be or obtained from the Hebrew by a change in the Masoretic pointing. Okay, but you don't. Okay, here they comment on the phrase "come to the full." So they're commenting on, and I'll show you in the here. They're commenting on the phrase, not the transgressors, but have reached their limit. They're commenting on that highlighted phrase right there, and they say there may be a reference here to various nations, or possibly specifically the Jews filling up the cup of their iniquity. Isn't that kind of interesting that they even acknowledge that it could possibly be the Jews here? But why would you say the various nations? It's kind of weird. So yeah, the commentary, at least, I'm sure there's going to be more than one position in the SDA church, but the commentary at least acknowledges that the transgressors have reached their limit could possibly be referring to the Jews. I don't think it's possible. I think it's a fact. And I'll go through that more here. So for anybody new listening, I will open up the stream to chit chat for a little bit if anybody wants to talk about the book of Daniel or chapter 8 specifically. If not, I will just close the stream down after like 5 minutes. So okay. Right. There are going to be two main views. There's going to be one that's more popular. There's one that's not as popular. Um, at the end of the day, uh, I would say, if the spirit of prophecy has the role that it claimed it had in the church, I would say I would go off, if I was SD, I would go off what she said, because that is, whether or not the SDA wants to recognize it, that is what's going to be, uh, even on a certain level, theopneustos, because it's the same spirit of prophecy that John had. There's no reason to make a distinction between there. So even there could even be like 10 versions uh, in the SDA church on what the daily is. And it doesn't really matter, in my opinion. It's what the spirit of prophecy taught is what is most important. And also, um, Ellen G. White did teach that people would stray from the what's called the present truth in Adventism, the pillars of Adventism. And one of those pillars, I'd say the main pillar, is 1844 investigative judgment. She said there'll be times where people will stray from this truth. Desmond Ford being an example of it, a famous example of it. But she also taught that, I believe she taught that in the education system, they will change the present truth and the pillars and deny them and all this kind of stuff. So she did kind of prophesy about that as well too. I wonder if this pastor will be honest and mention their 1844 date to support their Daniel. I've never listened to a single video of his, but I hope he does. I think he will be. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be. Um, and if he doesn't mention it, then I'll definitely bring it up, or Chris will, one or the other. I'll let Chris do more of the talk, and I'll kind of just hang out. Right, exactly. Yes, exactly. All right, I'm going to continue on. All right, so back up to verse. Where did I? Okay, yeah, here. So the little horn, to recap on verse 10, the little horn grew great. But notice here it says it grows exceedingly great in verse 9, but it only grows great, not exceedingly great, to the host of heaven and to the stars, and it tramples them down. Notice here in verse 11 again, it says it became great. So it repeats great, but it does not repeat exceedingly great. So that's an interesting thing. I'm not sure what to exactly make out. Maybe there's no significance to that. I'm not sure. Verse 11, it became great. That is the little horn. That is, I would say, Antiochus. The SDA would say it is pagan Rome. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. So the prince of the host, they'll point out, is Jesus Christ. They'll say this is another proof that this little horn cannot be Antiochus, but rather the Roman Empire, and especially Papal Rome. And Papal Rome definitely does that, right? I mean, go read their history. Go read any of their history. They were wicked. They still are wicked beyond measure. I mean, that's why there's a period in the Papal Roman time that's called the Pornaya period. Go look it up. Go look into it. It is, they were wicked. Let's say that, the slaughtering of people, wickedness, absolute wickedness, claiming to be speaking or being in the place of God, and all this kind of nonsense, man. It is crazy. But again, the issue is what? We are still in the third kingdom. We're not in the fourth kingdom. There has been no transition from the third to the fourth beast. And that's the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues for the Adventist position, is that there is no transition from the third to fourth beast. Because in every other vision where it goes from beast to beast, the beast is mentioned. So notice here, let's look at this real quick. Actually, I'll go down to the explanation. So it starts with Media and Persia, or Medo-Persia, and then it goes over to Greece and tells us it goes to Greece. But there is no mention here with the little horn that it is Rome. Go read the other visions, chapter 7, chapter 2, chapter 10 through 12. There is mention when a little horn or beast system, there is mention of the kingdom. And so that's actually going to be an argument I will present as well too, is that whenever we go from beast to beast, as far as I can tell, the kingdom is mentioned, or there's some beastly pictorial language to describe that that system. So here we have the ram and the goat. Well, the little horn doesn't have any of that. That is because it has not transitioned into the fourth beast system. It is still in the third beast system, and it'll stay in the third beast system. So, okay, it became great, even as great as the Prince of Hosts. Now, Antiochus does this, right? And the reason why it becomes great is because the previous verse, it tramples and throws to the ground the hosts of heaven and the stars. That is what it means to be part, at least part of what it means to become as great as the Prince of the Host. And here's another part of it as to what that means. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. So the context here shows us what it means to become great, even as great as the Prince of the Host. Okay. And Antiochus did all of this. And also, he definitely claimed to be, um, in the same way the popes did, he didn't claim to be God himself. He claimed to be like the main representative spokesperson for God on earth. That's why, um, his name was, on one of his coins, it was Antiochus Theos Epiphanes, or Epiphanes, however you want to pronounce that. but I think it's pretty clear from the context, and given that we're still in the third beast system, that it has to be Antiochus. There's nobody else that takes away the burnt offering. You read about this in First Maccabees, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. Okay, verse 12. And a host will be given over to it together. Now, maybe we got to ask the question, why does it repeat this? Now, if I remember correctly, there was more than one time where Antiochus uh, did this to the host, trampled on the host. In other words, killed and slaughtered the Jews. He did that more than once, I believe. It was at least twice. So it could be that's why it's repeating. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering. Now notice here, I want to point this out. So the host will be given over to be trampled on, and the regular burnt offering will be given because of, notice this, transgression. So what the little horn is doing is a reaction to the transgressors reaching their limit. And so if it is, in fact, the pagan Roman Empire that's rising here, who are the transgressors, and how do they reach their limit to then cause the regular burnt offering to be taken away, and the host to be trampled on, and the sanctuary to be overthrown? All of that refers to God's people and the sanctuary where the sacrifices are done. I'm not aware of any time during the pagan Rome, except for one time. That was in 70 AD. And the reason why this is important, and I'll mention that here in verse 14, but the little horn activity and the 2300 are connected. The 2300 starts. Now the SDA will say that there is no starting point given for the 2300, but in fact, there is. It's just not given in the exact same way chapter 9 is given. Chapter 9, it says when at the start of the decree, when the decree is given, that is when you start the 77s. It's just telling you in a different way here. It's telling you when the host is given over, when the little horn does his thing, when the little horn takes away the tamid, or the regular burnt offering, or the daily, and tramples the host and overthrows the sanctuary. Okay, I'll go on. Then I heard a holy one speaking. Actually, verse 12. I'm going to hop back down here. I didn't do that too well. So this king of boldface, which I mentioned is a king and not a kingdom, because he is one who understands riddles. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. Now, I can't remember all the details of Antiochus's career, but there is something that happened that fits this. And I apologize, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And he shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does. And now he definitely did this with the Jews, 100%. Behaved wickedly towards them, took their gold, to overthrew the sanctuary and all that kind of stuff. And shall succeed in what he does and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. So there we go. He destroyed mighty men and the people who are the saints. So these are the faithful Jews, the faithful people, as opposed to the transgressors who are the wicked Jews. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his name, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes. So it's repeating the same thing, just explaining it more, that we read in verses 9, 10, 11, 12. And he shall be broken, but by no human hand. Now there's a couple of explanations of how Antiochus died, and both would fit this description of not by human hand. I believe one story is that he died by tuberculosis. Okay, so let's hop back here to verse 13. So actually, I'm going to read a couple comments, try to interact. I don't even know. You're a bad influence, man. Bad influence. That's funny. It just flows so well. Media Persia flows better than Medo Persia. I don't know. It just comes off the mouth better. The chronology of Daniel 8. Prophecy clearly starts around 34 BC. Yeah. Why later make the 2300 start in 457 BC? Nothing supports starting the prophecy sooner. Well, I did point out what they say is here, since the vision is given in verse 1 and 2, that's when the vision is given. Verse 3 is the starting point of the 2300. They say the ram here is the starting point, and we know that's Medo Persia. I almost said Media Persia. That's what he's probably going to tell you if you make that point. So the reason why that is absolutely false is because the 2300 is directly linked with, and that is actually the starting point for the 2300, is the activity of the little horn. Whenever that starts is when the 2300 starts. You cannot separate them. There's nothing in the text that warrants that kind of separation. I would say it's an arbitrary. It's arbitrary to disconnect the 2300 and the little horn. Great point about the vision being unique in Daniel 9, not connected. Yeah, exactly. Yep. All right. So, verse 13. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, notice here, for how long is the kazon? So I'm going to show you that it's kazon. So I'm not just making it up. Why did I lose it? Oh, right here. Okay. Kazon. For how long is the kazon concerning? Notice this kazon here is specifically concerned about what? The regular burnt offering. Let's hop back up here to verse 11. The regular burnt offering was taken away. Taken away by who? By it. Who or what is the it? Go back up to verse 9. Verse 9 tells you who or what the it is, and it's the little horn. Okay? Very clear. There's no other it here from verse 9 to verse 11 that could fit or describe what the it is. There's nothing else here that can describe what the it is or be applied to what it is. It is the little horn. I don't think hopefully nobody would argue with that against that. So this kazon is specifically concerned about the regular burnt offering. So in other words, For how long is the activity of the little horn? That's another way you could say this right here. For how long is the activity of the little horn? Concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate. This would be, I would say, this transgression here refers to the activity of the little horn. The transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear, and this what I would point out to him if he makes an argument against it. The kazon is specifically concerned and focused on, and the starting point is the activity of the little horn. Verse 14, and he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. Okay, so the activity of the little horn is for 2,300 evenings and mornings. When that is done, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. Now, what the SDA argument will be is that the 2,300 is specifically focused on this part right here, the sanctuary being restored to its rightful state, not the activity of the little horn. The activity of the little horn is separated from, and at least in this vision here, is does not give a time period. From the text, do we see any way that that makes sense? Well, no. That's why the arguments of these kind of like side arguments of the wind, the horns, uh, the mare, the kazon. You'll see in chapter 9 that he'll mention the word uh, chethak, or cut off, or determine in verse 24. I'll go to that actually. What they'll say here in verse 24, the 70 weeks are decreed. What they argue is that, well, that word actually means cut off. And so that's that word right there, the chethak. And they're not wrong, right? It means to cut off, to decree, or determine. And more often or not, when it's used in extra biblical literature, it means to cut off. Now, the word kathak in the scriptures in the Bible is what's called a hapax legomenon. And basically what that is a very highbrow, fancy word for a single use word, a word that's only used a single time in the scriptures. And that is important because you can't go to any other scriptures and see the various ways it's used. It's only used this one time, and it's in verse 24. And the even the SDA commentary will acknowledge that the word determined is a proper translation of this word, because here in chapter 9, the time is set apart, cut off, or cut out from time, decreed or determined for all this to happen here in verse 24. There is no reason to say that it is cut off from another prophecy. There is no indication that is cut off from another prophecy. Even if it was, let's give them that argument. Say, okay, it's cut off from another prophecy. Fine. The issue is that Daniel chapter 9 concerns what? It concerns the sanctuary being put back to its rightful place. Verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one. So the decree, the starting point is to rebuild and restore the Holy Land, which includes the sanctuary. Chapter 8 is focused on what? The activity of the little horn that tramples and overthrows the sanctuary. It does the exact opposite of what chapter 9 is about. And so if these two are to be connected, let's give them that argument, okay? Then chapter 8 has to be focused on the fourth beast. So they'd be right about that as well. But there's only one time during the fourth beast where the sanctuary was trampled on, overthrown, and the transgressors, the Jews, reached their limit, and it's during the time of 70 AD. That means the 2300 has to be started in uh, 70 AD. And so if you, let's say we started in right when the all that starts in 70 AD, it would be 66 AD or 67, depending on who you talk to. So that means in the year 2367 or 66 is when uh, Jesus will move to the most holy place, not 1844. So you see the issue with that and why they don't go with that. So what they do is they say that this right here, which they say is 457 BC, this decree, is the starting point for the 2300 in chapter 8. But where does it tell us to start them at the same time? Chapter 8 doesn't tell us to do that. All chapter 9 says is that it's cut off or cut out from something. It doesn't tell us even what it's cut out from. It just says cut out or decreed or determined. And so you have to assume that that phrase kathak also tells you to start the vision at the same time, right? Because there's nothing else that's telling you that. It's an assumption that you have to make for, I would say, they'd say they'd have their own reasons. They'd say because it's clear as well from the Mari and the Kazon connection and the wind argument and all that. But that's only assuming what? Assuming 1844. It's not actually proving it from the text. And we'll get into the Mari and Kazon a little bit here in a second. But I wanted to kind of point this out because he may go to this. Or he probably will. And so one thing you'll notice with Adventists as well too is that they latch on to these kind of things, right? The wind opposed to the horn, these almost seemingly like arbitrary connections to kind of prove 1844. And this is another one, a hapax legomenon. They're using a hapax legomenon to prove their central pillar or to help support it. Support it would be a better way to do it. It's a better way to say that. They do it like in the book of Revelation too. Like for example, there's I believe it's verse 22 or chapter 22. They'll go to a textual variant there, and the variants read either keeping the commandments or wearing or having the white robes, and they'll go to that to prove one of their doctrines or partially prove it or help support it. They always go to these texts and these words that have sometimes ambiguity to them. But anyway, I'm getting distracted. Oops, I had that up the whole time. My bad. Oops. At the least, the little horn clearly arises after the large horn is broken, which I take to be oxygen. Yeah, I would agree. The issue with the SDA position, though, is I think pretty clear is that they disconnect the 2300 from the little horn. That is the central issue in all of this, in my personal opinion, and it's a central issue that they cannot get around in the text. Doesn't even matter if they use Mara and Kazon. Let's give them all of those arguments. They can have all of those. Let's say they're absolutely correct on every single argument that I've just presented so far. They still have not disconnected the 2300 from the activity of the little horn. Because like I showed in verse 13 and 14, it is very clear that the 2300 concerns the activity of the little horn. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Which is why They can't start in 457 BC because the opposite happened in 457 BC. They're saying the 490 years is being cut out of the 2300 years in Daniel 8. And they say that is what gives the starting point for the 2300 years. So the starting point for the 2300 and the 490 are the same for them. 457 BC. Let me see here. Right, exactly. Yeah, that's why decreed or determined is a perfectly appropriate translation, because that's exactly what it's time that is set apart for those specific things to happen in verse 24. There's no indication that right, exactly. Why can't it be cut off from the middle of the 2300 or the latter part? They say, well, that messes up the chronology and all that kind of stuff. Well, your chronology, yeah, it definitely messes that up, no doubt. Right. It would make more sense if they claimed the 2300 started in 66 AD or 70 AD, but nothing happened to the daily in 457 BC. Yeah, exactly. The exact opposite happened. Scripture says the Messiah will be cut off. Who will be cut off? A person, the Messiah. It does not say a period of time will be cut off. Well, that's just saying, I think in verse 24, I think all that it's saying here is that the 77s are determined or decreed for all of this to happen. And all this has to happen within those 77s, not outside of it. That's what it's saying. And the word can mean cut off. Here, I'll show you again real quick, Stephanie. The word here is kathak. I'll bring this up. So let's bring Strong's. So the Strong's shows that the kathak can properly to cut off, that is, to decree. So in other words, it's a set period of time that is determined for whatever the text says it's determined for. That's all that it's saying. But they say that it means it's being cut off from another prophecy. Now this one, which that didn't translate over very well, but this just says determine. Interesting. And this one, the BDB doesn't even tell us cut off. Weird. But it does mean cut off, or it can mean cut off. That's true. Okay. Let me take that off the screen. My bad. Back to chapter 8. So I think it's pretty clear, and I already proved that this 2300 is concerned with the activity of the little horn because it is the kazone concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression, makes desolate, and given over the sanctuary. Super clear. Abundantly clear. Now, starting verse 15 here, okay, we'll hop down here, is where it starts getting muddy. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, now I wonder which vision that is, right? Is it Kazon or is it Mare? So, and it came to pass when I, Daniel, had seen the Kazon. So, referring to what he just saw, all of that with all the animals and the horns and the winds, all these symbolic things is the Kazon. And Daniel sought for the meaning, so he wanted to understand this Kazon. And as he wanted to understand the Kazon, Behold, there stood before me, who's Daniel, as the appearance of a man. Now, this appearance here is the first time that this other word that can be translated as vision is used, and it's mare. Now, why that is important, notice here. So there stood before me the mare of a man. So mare refers to the appearance of. So in here refers to appearance of a man. And it's actually used like 3, 4 times in chapter 1 of Daniel. Go look it up. Mare is used about 4 different times, and it always refers to the appearance of a man. That's important. So verse 16. And I heard a man's voice. Now notice here, this voice comes between the banks of the Uli. So it's a man floating in the air, basically. But notice here, it's between the banks of the Uli. Well, where did we see that? Back in verse 2, we saw that he was in the Kazon. He was at the Uli Canal. Okay, so he's still obviously in the Kazon. He's still having the vision. And in the vision, the mare, or the appearance of a man, happens. And the man's voice between the banks of the Uli called out, Gabriel, make this man, that is Daniel, make Daniel understand. Let's see what he says. Where is it? Okay. Gabriel, make this man understand the mare. Okay, well, why is he using the word mare? Well, he's saying, make this man understand what just happened here. Because imagine you're Daniel and the mare of a man is floating between the banks of Uli and appears before you. So he's saying, make this man understand this mare of a man that just happened. Verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened. So this mare of a man comes near him. It frightens Daniel, right? It frightened me as well too. A floating man comes to you. I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man. Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the Kazon. So it went back to Kazon. So notice the mare has to do with the appearance of men. That is specifically what the mare is about, the appearance of men. And here in this context, the appearance of men within the Kazon, within the vision. Okay. So in the ESV it says, but he said to me, that is Gabriel, understand, O son of man, that the Kazon is for the time of the end. Now, that Kazon is this right here, is this Kazon, which concerns the activity of the little horn. And it lasts for 2,300 evenings and mornings, which I would argue is 1,150 days. But notice here that the SDAs will point out that the time of the end is what this is for. So it cannot be referring to Antiochus. And also they will use this to link it up with chapter 11 and chapter 12. They'll say these time of the ends. Well, there'll be different positions, but generally they'll link most of these time of the ends at this for the same time period. So that's an argument they will present against the Antiochus position, is that this cannot refer to Antiochus because it is for the time of the end. And I'll show you why that is wrong. But either way, okay, even if it is for the time of the end, which they would say one of the time of the ends is 1844, which that would be this one right here. And the other one would be Second Coming. So this Kazon, which is for the time of the end, and and it has to do with the activity of the little horn, and it lasts for 2300 evenings and mornings, uh, has to start with the Greek or the Roman Empire, which means the time of the end is not 1844, because the little horn activity is not in the second beast kingdom. Little horn activity is in the third and fourth beast. All right. He said, "Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter." Now, notice here, Gabriel's going to make known to Daniel what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. The indignation that refers to God's wrath. What is he being wrathful against? What is causing him to be wrathful? I would posit that this right here, the transgressors, is why this right here, the indignation, or the latter end of the indignation, is another proof that these transgressors are the Jews, because it brings about the curses upon them, which is, in this context, the little horn activity, the little horn. Okay. Because if we're going to say that this latter end of indignation is um, um, referring to God's people in the new covenant, well, I thought when we were in Christ that we pass from judgment and condemnation to life. Romans 5, we have peace with God. It is a powerful peace, an amazing, like a rich depth. The peace has a depthness to it that uh, I can't even describe with words. It is wondrous and joyous. So why would we want to put this indignation against God's people in the new covenant? Which I guess they can say refers to papal Rome. But even the SDA commentary, and I read it to you guys, said that these transgressors could possibly be the Jews. I don't say not possibly, it is, because it brings about the activity of little horn. Because if this little horn is pagan Rome and it's pouring out God's indignation or wrath upon the host of heaven and the stars, then you're saying that these hosts of heaven and stars are the transgressors in the new covenant. Okay, I don't agree with that. Read a few comments real quick. No chapters in the original. Yeah, definitely agree 100%. But you got to remember that when these were originally given, they weren't all given in the same day, right? I'm sure you don't believe they were given the same day, because they were given years apart. So there, for a while, he only had, uh, the first vision in chapter two. Then he received chapter 7 later, and then chapter 8 he receives later. So it's not like he had them all in the same day, just, breaks in between. Well, the time of the end is the part in Daniel 11 at the resurrection. Well, there's more than one time of the end in chapter 11 and 12. And so is it even possible that the time of the end can only be described within its context? And if it is, let's say in Daniel chapter 8, referring to the activity of the third beast kingdom, and if, let's go with your position, Daniel 12, the time of the end, that refers to the activity in the fourth beast, then they cannot be referring to the exact same thing, meaning they are the exact same time. Rather, what it could be doing is showing a shadow fulfillment, so to speak, in chapter 8, or the first little horn in chapter 8, and then another little horn arises in chapter 7, It doesn't have to be referring to the exact same one. The time of the end does not have to be referring to the exact same time of the end. There can be a time of the end of whatever the context tells you it's about. So in this context, it's referring to the time of the end, is referring to the indignation of God against the transgressors, which brings out the little horn against them. And so you're in this situation where you have the transgressors being God's new covenant people, believers in him, who are in him, and yet they are transgressors, and God's having to bring the little horn activity against them to trample over them and to overthrow the sanctuary and all that. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow. Challenge for you. The other time periods have to be years. Do you realize that? Or not literal? Well, what I'll do is I will open up the stream. If you want to ask those questions, we can get into that. I'll finish this I'll finish up real quick. Let me finish this up real quick. Okay, so where was I at? Man, why do I always lose my place so easy? What in the world going on? Why am I not seeing the indignation? Oh, here we go. Yeah, verse 19. I was looking too far down. Okay. So he said, "Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, that is God's wrath, for it refers to the appointed time of the end." Okay, so this God's wrath refers to the appointed time of the end. Like I said, I posit that it is the transgressors who are the Jews. Okay, and we already went over verse 20, 21, 22, 23, and all that. So let's make note of this too. Here in verse 26, notice this. Notice this. If there is a connection with Mare and Kazon in verse 8 and 9, okay, check this out. No, verse 26. All right. And the Mare, notice this. So if the Mare is separate from the Kazon, if the Kazon is the 2300 and the Mare is the uh, the 77s, or the 490 years, okay, the Mare of the evenings and mornings that has been told is true. So he just explained the evenings and mornings, and this proves the point I've been making, that this Mare, this appearance of Gabriel, is what I would call visionary explanation of the symbols that were shown to Daniel in vision. The Mare of the evenings and mornings, that is the Mare of the 2300s, that has been told is true. But seal up the Kazon, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Well, yeah, no doubt, because you just were given this intense vision. You had this appearance of a man floating over the canal. Came and explained to you that these visions represent a time where your people are going to be trampled over, and the sanctuary is going to be overthrown. And you're right now, if you're Daniel, you're right now in captivity because of that very thing. And he's telling you there's going to be a time in the future where it's going to happen again. Of course, you're going to be laying sick for days, especially someone as devout and intimate with Yahweh as Daniel was. Yeah, you're going to be sick for days and days, no doubt. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the. No, which one is that? I forget actually. So he was appalled by the Mare. That's because he was appalled by it because why? Because it explained the symbols and explained that uh, stuff was not going to be good in the future during the Greece kingdom, or the third beast kingdom, or the goat for him in this vision. Now here it says, I was appalled at the Kazon and did not understand it. Now, what the SDAs will point out is that, Chris, this happened to Chris when he talked to the Adventist Defense League, is they almost right away, they went to this right here. They said, well, Daniel did not understand the vision, but I would posit that at least in part he did. Because one, are we really saying that Gabriel failed to do what he was sent there to do? Okay, because Daniel was seeking understanding of the Kazon, of all the symbols that he saw. And this voice commands Gabriel to make this man understand. Gabriel is commanded to give Daniel understanding. And that's what verses 18 or 19 to verse 25 is understanding of the symbols that he just saw. So it's like, are we saying he didn't understand that Media Persia, or Medo Persia, is the ram? Are we really saying that he didn't understand that the goat was, or for him will be Greece? He probably didn't understand the first king, who that was. Actually, he didn't. He just understood that the horn referred to the first king, but he had no clue who he was going to be. Okay, so there is at least partial understanding in this vision. Okay, he's understanding that transgressors would be the Jews, because what happens due to the transgression reaching its limit? The sanctuary is overthrown. The people are trampled on. The daily is taken away. He already went through this, or he's going through it, because of the transgressors reaching their limit in the past. So he knows, at least in part, okay, what this vision is talking about. And that is why he's like, because notice here he says, the mare of the evenings and mornings is true. So at least in part he understood it. So I don't think it's really that strong of an argument to go to this person and say he didn't understand it. So that's why Gabriel had to come back in chapter 9 and explain more to him. So I think that is it. Those are the main talking points. There might be more. I mean, there's more with the Hebrew, but I mean, I don't translate Hebrew. So, I mean, I can study the Hebrew and understand and learn specifics, like with the Mari, Kazon, Kathak, and all that kind of stuff. But I prefer just staying in the English. I mean, English, we speak English. I think God's word is sufficient. And if we need to get into Hebrew, we can, but there's no real need to, because I think the chapter is pretty clear on what it's referring to. So, um, anyways, yeah, I'm going to open up the stream if there's anybody who would like to chit chat, talk about it, say my face is stupid or whatever. You're welcome to do that for a little bit, and then I'm going to have to pass out and get up early again tomorrow. But hopefully I explained things decent. I actually didn't explain too much how they connect the Mari and the Kazon. Now that I think about it, I should have done that, because that's huge. That's very important. So the Mari and the Kazon, I showed you all the places they're mentioned, right? They'll say the 2300 specifically was not explained. And so the 2300 refers to the Kazon, at the whole thing. And the Mare here is given in chapter 9, is what they say. And we'll notice here in chapter 9, obviously, but verse 21, it looks like the first one. So I'll read it, verse 20. It says, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, that's Daniel here, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God. While I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, notice here, whom I had seen in the vision at the first. So notice that he said the exact same thing in chapter 8. Right here. A vision appeared to me after that which appeared to me at the first. So in other words, this one's referring, saying, I've received another vision after the one in chapter 7. Daniel chapter 9 is doing the same thing here and saying, in verse 21, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen, so the same Gabriel who he had seen in the vision in chapter 8. So it's the same Gabriel, is what it's saying. Came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, now Mare always has understanding associated with it here when it's in this visions when Gabriel or an angel appearing. So here in verse 21, but notice here he says, even the man Gabriel whom I had seen in the Kazon. So that proves even more my point that the Kazon never ended and the Mare is found within the Kazon, meaning it is the explanation of the Kazon. It's not a separate vision. It's not a separate part of a vision that is to be cut off from the Kazon. It is directly associated with, in other words, it is an explanation of what he saw in the Kazon. So in the vision, okay. He made me understand, speaking with me, and speaking with me and saying, "Oh Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding." Now that is in the context of his prayer. Very clear. The prayer is about what? Restoration of the land, the people to the land, the holy city. Did I repeat that? Maybe, I don't know. And the sanctuary. That is what his prayer is about. So Gabriel came because of his pleas to restore all that. At the beginning of your pleas for a mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell it to you. So this word came out. This debar went out. And I have come to tell it to you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore consider the word or the debar and understand the mare. So in other words, and understand the mare. Understand this explanation that I'm going to give to you. Okay, there we go.
Hey, boo, boo, boo. Let's get
Sorry,
some picnic biscuits.
I didn't see you there. I was kind of
okay.
zoning out. Go ahead, talk for a little bit.
I don't think the Ranger's gonna like this, Yogi. So how are you doing?
Oh, I'm all right. I'm
I'm
tired.
all right. Just get to it. Yeah. So
You?
How
are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm good. So the thing that seems wrong about, I can see what you're saying, but with the cause zone and the Mara thing, but like he literally says, he asks about the cause zone, and then he's like, and then there was an appearance of another man, the Mare, whatever, right? That seems to be associated with it. And then Daniel's like, and then he's like, so Daniel's asking about the cause zone, and then then there's an appearance, a Mare of this guy, whatever, however you want to associate that. I'm not trying to push any particular thing, but then he says, and then Gabriel says to him, make him understand the Mare, and then he like does it think he asks again about the cause zone, and then the angel's like, no, dude, the cause zone is for later. And then he says, make him understand the Mare. So if it is the understanding of the cause zone, why would he say that cause zone, that he uses that word, Daniel does? And he's like, no, make him understand the Mare. And then he tells him the cause zone's for like later on. And so if the Mare is explaining the cause zone, why wouldn't he just say, here, no, here's the Mare. The cause zone is the same thing. He wouldn't say the cause zone is for later. And then I would say I agree with kind of the way you say it too. It seems to me when he says the Mare, the fact that it says the Mare is associated with the evenings and mornings, after he says the cause zone isn't the mare, and to make him understand the mare. But no, Daniel, you're asking about the cause zone. That's going to be something else, like the end of that, anyways. And so the fact that he actually, to me, the fact that he says the mare is of the evenings and mornings, it's like saying it's a part of. That's where you get the idea that it's not the same thing, because cause zones are concerned with the end and of later on. And if that's, I mean, right there, to me, that tells you that it's a different thing. Although yes, it is part of it, which is actually saying, and then he tells you it's of the evenings and mornings, and then that gives you the starting point, because it says he doesn't understand it. Now, this is a part I wanted to say to you, or I think that's interesting to consider. When he says, you think about it being in his position, like receiving these visions, right? He's in captivity. He hasn't gotten the announcement that the temple's even going to be rebuilt yet. He hasn't even prayed about it. So he gets this vision, and it regards the the sanctuary, the 2300, right? And obviously I was talking about the temple. It's like they're in captivity. The temple's destroyed. So he gets all these visions about the time periods, which like in Daniel 2, but then he adds this thing with the sanctuary being like defiled or whatever. But he's like, we don't even have the temple yet, or like the temple's already been defiled and destroyed. Or I mean, maybe not defiled, but you know what I mean? So like, obviously he was like confused. He's like, you're telling me this stuff about what's going to happen to the temple, and we don't even have one, let alone he doesn't have a decree about one. So like, that makes sense to me that in Daniel 9, he is going to be confused. He doesn't even have a temple. And so then he's praying because he knows there's something bad about the temple. What temple? There isn't even a decree yet, or a promise for a decree. That then he gets a decree. So think about that too. Like, and then what temple is he talking about in Daniel 9? That's after. It's what happens to it with Jesus after Antiochus. So, like, I don't know. It really all does hang on this connection here. Like, if that's right, that the mare is part of the cause zone, that pretty much seals the deal to me, don't you think? If indeed that is the case, because the things that he's looking down towards in Daniel 9, if it is connected with Daniel 8, it would be really confusing if they didn't have the same starting point. It seems that the mare has to happen. The things with the mare, if that is a portion of the cause zone, that means the cause zone has to be the end of that vision. The 2300 has to be after the 490. So a lot of hinges on that.
All right. So
don't you agree? I mean, do you agree with that fact? Like that's true? If the mare and the cause zone are connected in that way?
Well, so
if
real quick, verse 26, you said the mare, it says here the mare is part of the evenings and mornings, but I don't see part of. I just see the mare of the evenings and mornings. Where would you go to prove that it's saying here the mare is only part of the evenings and mornings?
Well, because of what I was describing, like, so it'd be like in the Hebrew, like John does a really good explanation of this, because at first it seems like what that makes it seem like it's I guess that's probably what informs people to not think they should separate them, right? Because the cause zone's associated with the evenings and mornings earlier, right? And now it's the mare, so you think, well, that must, and then how those terms are used, that just must be the same thing. But like the part that comes before this suggests it's something different. So that's the part that this is like the critical part, I would say. But like John and his thing, because it struck me that way too. It's like, wait, because in the English you'd be like, this is obviously the same vision as earlier, right? You wouldn't know it's a different word. You certainly wouldn't even think of that because it's associating it with it, and in English it's the same word. So John explains it like he puts in there, he adds in parentheses, he says the visions of I forget how he does it, but it's basically saying it's the same kind of construction when it talks about days in a month, or like the day portion of a 24-hour period, the light portion of a 24-hour period, like in the Hebrew, and he does it with several different things. So it literally is constructed in such a way that, like in other terms, we're just not used to associating something in that way with the word vision. It's like when you say the day portion of a 24-hour day, the day, I forget how he says it. It's really interesting. He has a bunch of biblical examples and different sorts of usages of that sort of thing. I guess I could try to find it and give it to you, but Yeah, you could still deny it, I suppose. If mare indeed is supposed to just be an explanation of the causon, sure, that I get where you're coming from. I would just say he's asking about the causon, and then the angel's like, no, make him understand the mare. And then he's like, so what about the causon? He's like, that's for later on. So, and then also when you were later in the chapter, when you were saying in the beginning of Daniel 9, it's like he says, I've come to make you understand the mare. Well, if mare means the explanation, it's like saying, I come to make you understand the understanding of the vision. You know, it's like, if mare just means the same thing, only it's an explanation of it, why would you say, I've come to make you understand the mare? Why wouldn't you just say understand the causon and not use mare at all? Why is there a qualifying thing? It's like a double, it's like a, what do you call that? Like, it's like a saying it the same thing twice in a row. Understand the mare seems like understand the understanding, and then it doesn't even mention the causon. That just seems like a confusing.
It could be the way that it is translated, but
Yeah, I guess I'd have to know the Hebrew, right?
verse 9:23, consider the debar and understand the mare. And this right here is given in the context of what? The prayer that is. So in other words, he says here in verse 20.
By the way, what you said about the beginning of chapter 9 in the prayer, and then how it does that in Daniel 8 too. Yeah, he's just saying it doesn't tie those two together per se. It just refers to it like it did in Daniel 8. That's a good point. I accept that.
Where am I missing it? Let's see. Verse 22, he made me understand, speaking with me and saying, oh, Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. So here Gabriel is saying he has come to give him understanding. And mare is always about appearance of a man or a man, like, so Gabriel or another heavenly.
That's in the dictionary too. It's appearing, more of a like vision sort of thing. I see that too.
Right.
But that's what kind of how it's used in the first time it comes up. But what if that's talking about the appearance of the man? Like, think about Daniel 10, right? He has a vision of the guy over the water. It seems like it's that sort of thing. Like, it's kind of introducing Jesus. Because like in Daniel 10, it's like this other figure that's like something special. It seems like that's kind of, there's the angels, and then there's this exceptionally special person, which we found out in Daniel 10 is like, you could say it's Christ, from the future, not literally, but you know what I mean? Like what he's going to accomplish kind of in view there. And then you see that in Daniel 8, it kind of seems like it's introducing this mighty man or whatever, this, however you want to translate it.
So,
and then after Daniel 9, right? It's Jesus, obviously, right?
In chapter 9?
No, in chapter 10. So like chapter 8, this seems like the mare kind of ties it, because it's like the angels, and then the mare, the appearance of this man. And then if it is true that mare in 9 is the explanation of the 490 years, well, that's about Christ. And so 8, that mare being like associated with this new figure that comes into the picture of the vision. And then that kind of in Daniel 10, after Daniel 9, you have the same kind of like this special figure again with the angelic figure. And it's like, that seems to be, it's obviously Christ, right? Like accomplished Christ or whatever. Like you could say it's him, because you see that in Revelation as well. And so
you're talking about verses 5 or 6.
Yeah,
5
he's
and
like
6.
standing over the river with his hands or whatever spread out.
I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches. Kind of a funny side note. Black Hebrew Israelites told me that.
Oh, I know, it's funny.
The eyes of flaming fire is his bloodshot eyes.
Eyes like wool. Only black people have hair like wool or whatever. That's like I'm embarrassed for them.
It's epic.
It's not the point, dude. That's symbolism. Like it's how they describe like him being like superhuman or whatever. So that's obviously Jesus. I agree with that. I would say I'm not sure what to do with that other than that it's obviously I would say it's the one described in Revelation for sure.
Oh, no.
But like, is this the same figure that's introduced in Daniel 8? I don't know. No one's told me that. I'm just saying, like, could that be, if that is associated with the 70 weeks and we get Mare introduced there and he said no one understood it, then it comes up again and then he explains the 70 weeks. And then you see that man in Daniel 10 and it's clearly Jesus accomplished after it mentions, looking back on it, it's like, okay, what happened in 9 is Jesus. And then chapter 10, we see this other figure again, and it's which we now know is clearly Jesus from like in Revelation, right? So I got to look into that. It just seems like that makes sense to me because like this is about Jesus ultimately. Like it seems like it should be.
Well, you're talking about the man here in verse 15, right?
Perhaps, yeah, it's speculation. I don't know.
Or no, verse 16, where a man's voice between the banks, because the mare of a man refers to Gabriel, but I heard a man's voice
Oh,
between
does
the
it?
banks of the
Okay.
Uli,
All right.
and the man's voice called Gabriel, make this man understand the mare.
Well, so wait, before me, one having the appearance of a man, that you saying that's Gabriel in verse 13,
Gabriel, yeah,
15?
yeah.
I thought Gabriel was
Oh
already
no,
there.
wait. Oh wait, no wait. So that might actually be okay. So when I Daniel seen the vision, the appearance of a man, and I heard the
Seems
man.
like this new figure is this appearance of a man. It's like that seems to me to be hinting at like, and then it's just that's Mare, the Mare of a man.
Well,
That could be that man after.
That could be it.
Kind of makes sense because like it's like this is like what matters about this is like Jesus, right? So you'd think it'd be like it's kind of, well, I don't know. I just think we should come at it without assuming the Mare is the explanation of the cause zone and not assuming that it's not. It's just like, but it is a new word and it seems to have a separation, but yet they're related. And so, because it's like, look at the way that it goes back and forth there. He's like, I want to understand the cause zone. And he's like, then there's the Mare of a man. And then it's like, then he's like, what about the cause zone? He's like, make him understand the Mare. And then he's like, hey, the cause zone's for later. And then, then he gives him more of the explanation, which is kind of weird, right? It does kind of seem like then what he says after that is
let's go over the verses. Let's go over the verses you're talking about. Let's go over those. Which ones are you talking about again?
So I guess right there, like he says, had seen the cause zone and sought to understand. So he's looking to understand the cause zone. And then, and then, so verse 15, he's like, make me understand the cause zone. And then it's like, then there's a Mare of a man. Right, and I heard a man's voice, and Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So Gabriel's talking to the man, saying, make Daniel understand the Mare.
Or so the man called to Gabriel and said, make this man understand.
Right? Yeah. So the man is Jesus, I'm going to say. And he says, Gabriel, make him understand this new word now, Mare, which is associated with the man. It's the appearing of the man. And then, so he asks about the cause zone is what I'm saying. And then we get this man appears, and his appearing is Mare of a man. And then that man says to Gabriel, make him understand the Mare, right? And because he's like, I want to know about the cause zone. He said, no, make him understand about the Mare, which is associated with the man talking. And then he goes up to Daniel. He's like, look, dude, the thing you're asking about the cause zone, that's for later. And then he goes back to continuing with the succession of kingdoms, right? And introduces, what does he introduce after that? I forget what all is said after that.
Well, okay, real quick. Okay. So the cause zone is for the time of the end. So you're saying it starts later?
But because he asked about what about the end of the 2300, right? So it's not asking, and that's what I was trying to say to you guys like a month ago, is like, you guys want to like associate that part, but the cleansing of the sanctuary would be towards the end, would be the end of the 2300. The important part of that is when it's cleansed. And so it's not so much about the period of the 2300, but what happened, that's like when the temple's cleansed. So it's looking to the end. And so then I would say when he asks about the cause zone, because he still doesn't get it, right? Because he doesn't even have a temple yet. So he's like, what temple? Like, blah, blah. He's like, well, don't worry, that's for later. And then he asks about the cause zone, and then Jesus appears, or this man. I didn't say that. That was the Holy Spirit. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't mean to say that. But so I would say it's looking to the end. And then he asks about it, and he's like, that's for later. And then the appearance of the man. And then the man's like, Gabriel, make him understand Mare, because he's asking about the cause zone. And then then Gabriel goes to him and goes, look, because he had just asked about the cause zone. The man says, Gabriel, tell him about Mare. And then he walks up. Then so Gabriel goes up to Daniel and he's like, hey, dude, like, okay, I'm adding this, but you could say, like, he's like, you asked about that cause zone thing. That's for later. And then he's like, so it's like this introduction of this new thing, or somewhat of a new idea. That little interaction right there is what does it for me, though, because he's like, hey, you asked about that cause zone. I've been told to tell you about the Mare. So let me tell you, that cause zone you asked about, that's for later. Let me get to the Mare. And then he says the mares of the evenings and mornings. So that's what kind of starts you realizing, because that you don't have a starting point for the 2300. But when they get connected, then they both have a starting point. And then once you realize the mare is related to the 70 weeks, obviously it has to be a portion of the 2300. And if that's true, then the 2300 has to be yours, obviously, if that's all the case.
Okay, so do you see from verse 3, verse 3 to verse, I'll be generous, verse 12, do you see that being recapitulated in verses 20 to 26 or 25?
That's a good question. Let's see. Kind of, or at least in the general. Go back to the first verses again. I forget what it says.
Which one? Verse 2?
Yeah, this is
Verse 3.
So yeah, it starts in Persia, which is when the decree would go out, by the way, for if they have the same starting point. That may be significant. And so
So
I would say no, not necessarily. No, they're not the same period then, I guess.
Well, verse 3, okay, it has the ram.
Right.
Verse 4 has the ram and then the goat coming in. Verse 5 has the goat taking over.
Greece, right? Which is the
Okay, so we'll go with that. So verse 20 has the ram, and he's told what the ram is. Verse 21 has the goat and what the goat is.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 22 then has the horn that was broken, which was talked about in verse 5. Conspicuous horn. We'd say that's the horn that's broken, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's giving the interpretation of the earlier
exactly.
part. Right.
Well, I would say all of it, but so here, as for the horn that was broken, in place 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms. Okay, so those 4 kingdoms you would say is the 4 horns, right?
The 4 winds and the 4 horns.
Or the 4 winds, 4 horns. Both.
I don't have my mind wrapped around that. I've just kind of taken it for granted. I have to look into it for myself.
So it would be repeating what here it says in verse 8 and 9. So the goat became. You can just read it. I don't have to read it for you. Like I'm reading you a bedtime story or something.
Well, that's what I was looking for.
So you see the 4 horns, 4 winds, and then out of one of the little horn, okay, little horn grows gay, grows great to the host of heaven. Okay,
yeah,
so
they weren't born that way though.
Right. So here we got the horn that's broken, 4, and then we got the 4 kingdoms, which parallels the 4 horns, and then verse 23 at the latter end. So it gives you kind of the general time period of when this happens. But notice here the transgressors, and I point that out. The king of boldface. The king of boldface would be the little horn, right?
Seems to be, yeah. The transgressors. I heard you what you were saying about that earlier. I was listening.
Yeah. Okay, so everything's been recapitulated so far, and so verse 24 and 25 are explaining what the little horn does.
Yeah, it seems to. Yeah. Okay. It sounds to me like that could be the Antichrist or whatever before Christ returns, and like 2 Thessalonians 2. I don't know.
Okay. So we agree on that then with referring to the little horn. So that is explained here. That's given in symbols here in verse 11 and 12.
Right.
Okay, so far verses 3 to 12 have been recapitulated.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that so Adventists often say like this doesn't have to be heavenly language, but it's like the Prince of the Host, that's Jesus, right?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that.
And like, because he's the one over the temple, whether it's Antiochus or not, right? So, but like that, to me, I still think that the fact that it uses that sort of language suggests. Now, I think when the Jews originally read it, they didn't think it was that. Okay, so I'm not saying it can't be used that way, but there's this weird association in symbols, which I kind of got from Michael Heiser and just from my own kind of reading. No one really taught it to me, but that sort of language is kind of thematic in Scripture, right? Like he knows the stars by name. We see the saints on the sea of glass in the book of Revelation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, and he tells Abraham, count the stars if you can. That it's going to be your offspring. And I'm going to bless the earth. And so there is this interesting thematic, and that kind of fits with this interwoven spiritual battle that Paul talks about. We we see that in Daniel with these spirits behind these men. We see that in prophecy of Ezekiel 28 with the Prince of Tyre, and then this obviously Satan. And then we see that in Revelation 12. I mean, to deny that this Bible has this meta story kind of weaved in and out of this particularly apocalyptic literature would be a mistake. So I think, but sorry,
I don't disagree with it. Okay, so we agree that the Mare recapitulates the Kazons from verse 3 to 12 in verses 20 to 25. Okay?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the earlier part seems to be more certainly talking about the empire, succession of empires or whatever, like particularly. But then that is the interpretation.
So
it is kind of weird. That's an interesting point.
I forget which early church father it was, but there was an early church father that, and I put it on my community post, where he did interpret this to refer to the events in 70 AD, which is pretty interesting. It's a very minority view, but it is possible.
Hippolytus, maybe?
No, I think it was
Tertullian.
No, I'm not gonna remember.
I have that too. There was the thing that have you noticed though, like in reading, like, oh, Josephus says it, so it must be true, dude. Like a lot of people, including preterists still today, and a lot of like critical scholars in the 18 and 1900s were like, they think like when you go that route, it's like, well, Daniel 8 and 9, I think Josephus like connects the abomination from Daniel 8 with the one in Daniel 9, which messes up the whole 70-week things too, right? So like a lot of them thought that 8 and 9 were intrinsically connected because of that language as well, but that's obviously false.
Yeah, I think we all believe that these visions are connected. The issues are how.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Okay, so verse 13.
But like Antiochus, Josephus didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah, and he connected Daniel 8 with Daniel 9. So I don't really, not to mention, it says no one in Daniel 12. This is the last thing I'll say, and I'll just listen, but unless you want me to respond. But it's like Daniel 12. What was I going to say? It says that I forgot. Never mind.
All right. Verse 13 says, so the recapitulation in the later part of Daniel here, in the earlier part, verses 3 to 12, it just stopped. Now we have a Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to the original Holy One, "For how long is the kazon concerning the regular burnt offering?" So this time period here, this 2300, is specifically focused on, and I would say it's given a starting point, and it's when the regular burnt offering is taken away, or the daily, the transgression that makes desolate. I would say that's the activity of the little horn, and the giving over the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot. So all that happens because the transgressors here in verse 11 or verse 12, excuse me, it says all this happens because of the transgression, or in verse 23 says transgressors. Okay, so, and it says for 2300 evenings and mornings is how long this little horn activity is to happen. So the focus is not only on the ending point, which I would not disagree with, but it's also focused on the activity of the little horn. And actually the time period, the 2300, starts and finishes with the activity of the little horn. I don't think that's is escapable with 13 and 14.
Sure, that's true. Because if it were years, it would encompass all the other time prophecies in that period. Like it fits with either view, I would argue. Like it can fit with in either sense. So yeah, I would say it kind of is like a presupposition with it. But yeah, sure, it doesn't negate your view for sure. In that sense, I'm trying to be fair here. I'm my best, but let me ask you this: why, if it's to be taken literally, why would they put the evenings before the mornings? Like unlike the daily everywhere else in the literal narrative of the Bible, when it talks about these sacrifices, it's morning and evening sacrifice every time, never evening and morning.
Right. So
it can't be literal, right? Or is it?
What I have thought about when it comes to because it seems like this happens more than once, right? This odd way to describe time. chapter 8 here has the 2300 evenings and mornings. So the evenings and mornings are backwards. And the 2300, we don't see that anywhere else. Chapter 9 has what? 77s, and the 7 has no modifier to it. So you kind of got to figure out, is it days, weeks, or is it
What's your
years?
thoughts
What
on
is it?
that? What do you think it should be heptads, or do you think it should be? It seems like it's the same word as what in Daniel 10 is translated as weeks.
Right, but Daniel 10 has the modifier of weeks, if I remember correctly. I'd have to look at that again, but I'm pretty sure Daniel 10 has the modifier with it. Daniel 9 is the only one that does not have the modifier to tell you if it's days or weeks. Or
I think they understood it as being related to the sabbatical cycles from Leviticus.
well, one reason why I say that is that the text, I think, is clear. It doesn't have the modifier. But if you read the website Jews for Judaism, they make the point and they interpret Daniel 9 as being literal time. So they have it in the time of like Cyrus or something like that, something really odd, obviously to get around the fact that it refers to Jesus. But it was
Yeah.
interesting that they
So they take
why
it as weeks then. So a week, days.
days.
But literal.
Yeah,
Interesting.
literal. Yep.
Weird. Because I saw that post you did, but I had it too. So it's interesting because that is something Adventists have pointed out. So there's like a sense in which it is the weeks, but there's a sense that it's like being pointed to as being directly associated. So like it isn't appropriate to say it's symbolized there because it's given as a literal prophecy, but it's understood. So in a way, it's like it should almost be translated as a week of years, but not because it's weeks and then being interpreted through a prophetic hermeneutic, but like literally it should just be taken as years, period. And which kind of seems like it undermines the consistency of the day-year principle thing, but in reality, it's like establishing it, just not symbolically, because those years are associated and taken from the week from creation, and then which is interesting because when you look at, if you understand, like I would read about, I have like that archaeology, Bible archaeology. They're not Adventists. They take Adventist stuff into account, but they don't think these are years. But the 70 weeks, they point out that you have read it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've had correspondence with the person who writes all that stuff. They're pretty nice.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a good website. I read his article as well on the birth of Christ. I can't remember. I think he says 4 BC or 5 or something like that.
Yeah, I sent him an email about that too. I was like, dude, Adventists, like, I'm still trying to figure out if 3 BC can work, because I'm convinced that the idea that Jesus, when you align the stars like appropriately, that falls on apparently September 11, which is for the first of Tishri in 3 BC. And it's like an 80-minute window on that day. You know how I found that out?
How?
Did I tell you the story? It's kind of weird.
Go ahead.
So have you heard of the people say Ellen White, like in the testimonies to the church, is talking about 9/11? Have you heard that?
Yes.
So I was just looking into that, trying to like see if there's any legitimacy to that, right? Because it's like it's in Testimonies 9 and starts on page 11. And there's interest. I think it's kind of weird. I don't know what to make of that. It seems like a really crazy coincidence because she says a bunch of interesting stuff about that. And like Adventists think this is the time of the end. And she describes New York and the buildings there. And she says it's not, all that. And so I was just like looking for any data I could find on it. Right. And then I was searching for that because it was 9/11. That's how I found incidentally Michael Heiser talking about it and how that's related to Jesus' birthday. And that just struck me as like really like kind of like one of those synchronized moments or whatever, where I felt like, how does this connect? Like it's that 9/11, like why would she have a vision about that particular? And then I find it's like, that's probably Jesus' birthday, but of course that's a different calendar, right? But I don't know what to make of that. And by the way, 2001 is on the Shemitah, the sabbatical cycles from that rendering of Jesus dying in 31 AD. If you the sabbatical cycle ending in 34 AD, if you go down through history with 7-year cycles from there, that would land on 2001. It's kind of interesting, which would be Jesus' birthday. Although he wasn't born, that wouldn't be him being born on the Shemitah cycle, but on the Day of Trumpets. I don't know what to make of it, but it was weird. It was very weird.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go back to Daniel 8.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing, too, is, how I got into this internet community, too, as I was searching something from James White, like where he says, like, his wife couldn't have couldn't have gotten this from any sources or whatever, something dumb like that. He said, you know, and someone was saying, see, it's a false prophecy because she did borrow. And so I was looking for that quote, and I was looking up James White, and I found James White, the Calvinist, right?
Right.
And I listened to him, and I started listening to him for. I've listened to him ever since. Actually, that was like 5-6 years ago. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
So you're a closet case Calvatard. Got it. All right. Anyways.
Yeah, I am.
Daniel 8, starting verse 15. So when I, Daniel, had seen the Kazon. So
He almost got me, by the way, too. Like I was right there. I was like, no, I just can't
got
go
you.
there. The free will thing and like the problem of evil. Like I was decided on that on my own thinking, you know. But he almost got me. He's real good.
Oh yeah, he's a very, very sharp man. Very sharp.
I just
Especially
couldn't bite the bullet with the determinism thing and the free will and the problem of evil. I just can't.
Well, I mean, I've always said whether so you have the two extreme views that I absolutely 100% reject. But within those two extreme views, you have everybody else trying to figure out the relationship between God, who is all knowing, who does decree certain things, even if you don't want to say all things. You can say he decrees some things, and he has plans. I mean, what do you think? How
Yeah,
I know for myself, when I plan ahead of time, I am very in depth, especially when it involves my family. I'm very in depth, very detailed. I don't miss anything. So how much more would God, who when it says he plans, how much more detailed would he be? So even if we want to say that's within time, it's still before whatever he's planning to happen happens. So there's at least a certain sense where certain things are decreed. But then we're trying to understand how that relates and how it involves human will, because humans have will. It's just a fact. We all have wills. And if
yeah.
the will
Yeah.
is absolutely 100% free, then the open theists have a point, but I absolutely reject open theism.
I know it's so hard, dude. It's like it's got to be in the middle somewhere because I like that's why, and maybe just because I like CJ, but I do, and I have friends that are Calvin, other friends that are Calvinists too. But it's like I think Calvinism keeps people from going like too far. We say, oh, you know, it's like people will not accept that God invokes Satan in Job, for instance. Like it's like, dude, it's true. God did that. He's like, hey, have you considered my servant Job? Satan wasn't attacking him, and God was like, okay, fine, I guess I'll let you. It's like, no, God wanted him to do that. Calvinists keep people honest. And I kind of feel like it's the same thing. It's like if Calvinism didn't exist, then, you know, these free gracers would have taken the sauce and ran wild, and everybody would be a universalist by now. Because I'm sorry, maybe there's like a balance. Like God wants people to keep each other honest, kind of like having Democrats around, you know, so we don't go like crazy. You know, you just like it's a necessary thing. Like I don't think Calvinism is ultimately right because I think it goes too far, but I certainly can't. It's weird. It's hard. I don't think there's a good answer for either in either direction, you know.
The basic way I view it is I always side with God being greater in the end. And even if I'm wrong that he does, because I mean when somebody says, yeah, God decrees all things, instantly in anybody's mind you think the worst things. Oh man, that means he decreed evil and all this kind of stuff. Well, in anybody's view, on a certain sense, he does decree everything, because even in the free will side, he does what? He allows everything to
Yeah.
happen. But not
Hands
only does
off, he's letting it happen, and when he's involved, he's doing it. So it's like either way, he's in charge. He's sovereign.
not only does he allow it, he knew it would happen before he created, and he created anyways to allow that evil to happen. But also, I'm sure every Christian would agree with this, he sustains every individual human and the universe, obviously, but he sustains every single wicked individual who's committing evil right now. He sustains them and gives them life. So in some sense, everybody has a quote unquote determinism. It's just the Calvinists tend to just step up to the plate almost and kind of give answers to it. And they may go a little too far. Fine, whatever. I'm okay with that. But there is a sense where everybody, with excluding open theism and hyper Calvinism, because I believe those are both absolutely horrible and wrong. But
Right.
everybody else
That's what I
has a
mean.
view of determinism. So it's
When you
kind of
start breaking it down, it's like the open theist. Like when you start realizing the implications of like, okay, if God doesn't know the future, Like, you can't, like, I can predict stuff certain people will do because I know them pretty well enough. God knows everybody better than they know themselves. How could he not know the future? And then you have to go, well, then you have to start limiting his ability to know certain things that it seems like he ought to know according to what scripture says. Then pretty soon you're like, well, if he can't know that, then like, because I can predict what you'll do, I can push your buttons, and I can predict with almost certainty what certain people will do. So it's like God could do that only way better, and with everybody all at the same time. We are more predictable than we like to think. So it's like, and then it's like, well, then if he doesn't know what we're going to do next, like what's holding him back? Does he have a limited processor, you know? And it's like, does he not have omniscience? Because it's just like, it's tricky, right? So then you end up having to take away these attributes. And then if he doesn't have that attribute, he doesn't really know anything. He can't really know anything for sure once you start removing attributes to keep that from making sense. And now you got a God that knows nothing. And so he's basically not a God. And then, but the other way, it's like you have God determining everything where he's like, you don't even need Satan anymore. It's just God wants it to happen and he makes it happen. And you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. That doesn't make sense. I don't think the Bible's presenting that idea. It distances God, but it also seems like he knows. So I think we should leave the mystery there.
Yeah, basically how I would say it is that if you read about God's knowledge in the scriptures, not about like the events with, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah, wherever, where he says, let's go down and find out, or with Job or whoever. But if you read the actual descriptions of what God's knowledge is, it is all encompassing. It is perfect. It is perfect.
I definitely don't think he's having to investigate to find out. It's more like, I'm going to get hands on here because like, and show my presence sort of thing. Like, I'm going to do this myself.
So I always find, I just always find it just fascinating, especially nowadays, that there is this, seems to be this popular trend, obviously due to certain individuals, which is, it is what it is, but this popular trend to be absolutely rabid against Calvinists is pretty
Oh, I know it. I laugh about it, dude. I want to make like some poems about it. I've tried to. They literally are like, they are deformed children that plopped out of Calvin's womb, born with teeth and little beady eyes, and they bit off the umbilical cord and scampered off, leaving bloody footprints. And they ran into the closet, and you can see their little beady eyes glowing in the closet, and they're cursing at their mother, Calvin's womb, because without Calvin, their little OSAS twisted view wouldn't even exist. And I'm not blaming Calvin. I'm saying they twisted it.
Yeah.
Can you see the little demon in the closet in the dark with his little red eyes glowing and the bloody footprints? Umbilical cord squirting blood everywhere. You know what I'm saying?
There's this live stream I want to do with CJ on free grace. I might do it. I emailed him and the punk didn't even email me back, so I'm gonna have to bug him again.
He works too much.
Oh, I know. He's
Hit him
busy.
on Facebook Messenger.
I don't do Messenger. I left Facebook and I just rejoined to do certain. I was gonna talk to this one guy live, and he said he didn't want to, so I don't really do Facebook.
What about it though? You just want to talk to him about it?
Oh yeah, no, I want to do a certain point on it. I think it's always important to focus on this point, but I'm gonna leave it a mystery to see if we do it or not.
He listened, I think, to you talking to Kevin and said something about he was surprised that you didn't agree with him more because of what the reformers said.
Yeah, I was kind of sloppy last night because I've been fixing my parents' house with the roofing and the siding. I wasn't prepared like I wanted to be, and I was tired, and I don't think I was as clear as I could have been. But
well, I mean, if you agree too much, you might start sounding like Adventist.
Well, what I see when it comes to laws, I see that they are definitely connected to covenants, and you can have laws overlapping from covenant to covenant. I have no issue with that, really, and I do believe as well that morality doesn't change. And I find it fascinating that those who would say, let's we're under Christ's law, which I don't disagree with at all, but I find it fascinating that they don't want to say, well, we also, are they trying to say we're not? They're not saying this, but it's almost like they want to reject morality, but they don't.
It's the Sabbath. It's actually becoming the dividing issue, just like Evan has said. I'm suspicious of that because look, nobody talked that way. If you read the Protestant history and the church history, they talked about the commandments, and then look at like everybody called Sunday Sabbath, not because they were keeping it, as a pagan holiday, but because Like the Ten Commandments are just the moral law. That's why we have them everywhere. What caused the change? What invented this view that's totally nonsense? Because like, look, nobody thought the moral law is done away with. Everybody knows you're saved by grace through faith. That's Protestant in the derivative. So it's like, what's causing this? Well, I would argue that it's the inconsistency with the Sabbath issue. Honestly, I think that plays a role in it.
Well,
Because it seemed to happen around the time the Adventists started, and people and it, pushing that.
well, the issue I have with the reformers is the tripartite division. I don't agree with that, but I do agree with it. So I would not
You
call
do and you don't, right? Me too. Yeah.
I would not call the Decalogue the moral law, as if that encompasses or has all morality. I would say there is Torah, and within Torah there are moral laws, there are civic or civil laws, and there are ceremonial laws. That's how I would word it.
Sure. I think that's more accurate. I think the Ten Commandments thing, like, because if you listen to the scholars, like Adventist scholars, like talk about it, they recognize that, and it's like, look, Adventists keep the food laws, right? So, or like, so they obviously don't think it's simply the Ten Commandments, like Miles makes it sound like. It's like that's like a shorthand, because like if you have to try to explain all the nuances, you'd be sitting there for 20 minutes explaining it. And if you just say it's the law, the entire law given from Sinai, then that people get to totally misunderstand. They're going to think you're saying we're under the old covenant. You say the law of Moses. So I don't know. I think there is an interesting distinction though with the handwriting of ordinances, which seems to be related to what thing went in the side of the ark. Now it's probably just, what do you think that looked like? I mean, was it just the first 5 books of Moses? Maybe, I don't know.
So an issue that comes up, and it is with Adventists in general, and I talked to plenty of them back when I was on Facebook, because I joined a lot of SDA debate, non-SDA pages. They would always tell me that the moral law of the Decalogue, because Ellen G. White uses that language, sums up all other moral laws that could be found in the Mosaic law. So they would say, do not murder sums up the dietary law. That's why it's a moral law. So I would always ask, what laws does the
Weird.
Sabbath sum up? Because the Sabbath would sum up what? The yearly Sabbath, the ceremonial Sabbath.
I wouldn't say it that way.
No, plenty of them did. Like tons of them
They're
did.
dumb. They're dumb.
It's a common argument, though. At least from
Look,
what I've...
the Leviticus 23 thing is just listing all the appointed times, which just means the times God said to do stuff on a certain time frame, because it's like the word for season, like, like the moed in the creation story. It doesn't mean that is the feast, but it's context. It's, to me though, so appointed, they just means appointed times or seasons in a sense, depending on the context. But look, I don't know how people don't see the fact that the Sabbath was instituted before the fall. God doesn't institute stuff before it has a purpose. Like, he doesn't judge people until they've reached full measure of their evil, and he warns. And so even, yes, God could do whatever he wants, but he seems to, like, and that's what I don't get about, it's like everybody needs an investigative judgment too, by the way, more than Adventists do, because you guys believe you go straight to heaven when you die. That makes no sense. Like, but then there's a judgment. Like, what's the point if everybody's fates are already decided? And what's the point of a resurrection if you already go to heaven? Why didn't Paul comfort the Thessalonians with, don't worry, they're in heaven right now with the Lord? He says, no, he comforts them with the resurrection. So, like, dude, like, I can't unbe an Adventist because they get so many things right that everybody's missing. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Help me.
Well, okay, so let's go back to Daniel chapter.
Okay.
Oh, I was going to look at something here in chapter 7.
If you don't start with Daniel 2, it's going to be harder to see the correct Adventist view, I think. All right, I'll leave you alone. I'm going to listen to you. I got to lay down.
You don't even know how many Daniel and Revelation seminars I had to participate in. I
Really?
still have their binders and all that. Yes.
What happened?
Me, I grew up in Adventist. I went to SDA schools and boarding academy, and I would participate. I'd paint out the flyers.
I went to Auburn Academy, by the way. I graduated in 2002. You don't have to tell me yours if you don't want to, but
Auburn.
you've heard of
in
that, right?
Washington.
You've heard of
Oh
that?
yes, of course, yeah. I would say things, but I'll say I went to college for a year at Walla Walla.
You did?
Yeah.
I went there for 1 year. The first year it was a university.
No, it was before university.
So you went before me then.
College, Walla Walla College. Yep.
Yeah, I went there the first year it became a university. I think that was let's see, 2010 or something maybe.
Wait, so how old are you?
39.
Okay.
But I went late. I went to college late. I graduated and then I was like touring in a band for a while. So
yeah. Okay. Let me see here. There was something I was going to point out here, but no, I won't be able to find it. I'm getting tired.
I went when I was 25. I was 25 when I went, and then I got cancer. I was going to go back the next year, but I got cancer.
That's a important reason not to go.
It's crazy. Right before I was going to sign up to go back for the second year because I was doing a double major in business and automotive tech, and then that happened and I never went back.
I took their automotive class in my only year there too.
Really? You remember the teacher? He's pretty cool.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
He had glasses.
Yeah.
He had a cool truck with like a turbo on the rear axle. It's pretty cool, like a lightning truck. Neat.
Anyways, all right. Anyways, so when Daniel had seen the Kazon, okay, so the vision that he just had with all the symbols.
Oh wait, one more question. Lee Venden. Do you know who Lee Venden is? I think he was the pastor there with that. Was he there when you were there?
No, I don't remember.
You don't remember? Okay.
No, right, I'm the worst with names in general. I forget my wife's name all the time, so I'm just
probably Joe, Mary Jo, or no, Debbie.
Joe Bob.
Yeah.
All right.
Good enough. All right. I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna lay down. Good talking to you, man.
Yeah, me too.
I will be listening.
Okay. All right. When Daniel had seen the Kazon, okay, so the symbols that he just seen, he sought to understand them. So he wanted to gain understanding of those symbols that he saw in verses 3 to 12, or I'd say even 3 to 14. And behold, after he sought to understand, behold, there stood before him the mare of a man. So a man appeared. There's an appearance of a man before him. In other words, it is similar to what Daniel says in Daniel 9, where he was pleading with the Lord and Gabriel came in swift flight. Verse 16, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the mare. So he needs to understand right here, the appearance of a man. He needs to understand this mare right here. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the Kazon, make sure that is Kazon, I believe it is. Where is it? That the Kazon is for the time of the end. So this Kazon here, this 2300, which concerns the activity of the little horn, is for the time of the end. So this appearance here, this mare, is to just explain this Kazon that is to happen at the time of the end. That is why here in verses 20 to 25, you see verses 3 to 12 being recapitulated. Because he's already given the time. The times doesn't need to be explained anymore. He's explained in verses 23 to 25 the little horn, what the little horn does, what it is, everything. And so he doesn't need to repeat what the time is, because for one, it doesn't concern his time period. So he doesn't need to understand the 2300 fully. Because there is some interesting thing here where the 2300 evening and morning and the 77s are time frames that are worded in a way that's not worded anywhere else in the Bible. They're very odd ways. And I would say I know you asked this question earlier. I think I've thought about this. I think they're done um, because here in chapter 12, where is it? It says that the vision, that the at the very least, this vision, 10 through 12, if not the whole book, is supposed to be sealed up and put away. Let me see. Okay, here, verse 9. He says, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end." So that could be part of the reason why these time prophecies are worded the way they are, is because it is to be sealed up and shut up. There's to be sealed and shut up. So it makes it hard to understand these visions for these people. That could be a reason why. Um, could be also because they're symbolic. Um, but I think the 23 here, it would still be symbolic. Yeah, it'd be symbolic of evenings and mornings. But oh, you left the live stream. I was going to ask you a question, interact with you, but I think I'll just end it there. I'm starting to get pretty tired and just repeat myself. So I appreciate everybody listening tonight. It definitely went on for a long period of time. I look forward to Friday's discussion with Chris and John from Angels in the Glen. Grace and peace to everybody. God bless.